stuff. So are the roads, are they covering people? Crud? Oh, well, yeah, I know you were coming to that, but like, the roads around here are just covered in like debris still.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm John Hudak, the Director of the Office of Cannabis Policy. I'd like to formally welcome all of you to the first meeting of our Cannabis Hospitality Task Force. It's my pleasure to welcome you, but also you have the offices and my thanks for participating in what will be 4 meetings of this task force over the coming weeks. As you're all aware, this task force is a legislatively drafted effort pursuant to the public law that came out of LD 40. To start, I'd like to briefly go over the legislative charge.
Hudak, you need to speak up
Oh,
for
okay.
the online folks.
I never hear that.
I know.
Okay, to start, I think it's important for me to go over the legislative charge. We've had some comments and questions come in to the office about why exactly the task force was organized and for what purposes. And so to start, the legislature directed us to convene a cannabis hospitality task force specifically for the adult use program. There were questions about why there was not membership on this task force from members of the medical cannabis program. And as I read through some of the legislative language, I think it'll be clear why that's the case. The task force is charged in 5 areas to consider. First, whether the office should issue a single type of cannabis hospitality establishment license or various license types for different business models, how different methods of consumption are to be regulated, what other products or services, including food or entertainment, may be offered at cannabis hospitality establishments, training for cannabis hospitality establishment employees, and local control, including whether municipalities need to opt in or opt out of allowing cannabis hospitality establishments, and how municipalities may or may not regulate such an establishment. The office, this is continuing to read legislative language, the office shall appoint members to the task force that include a supporter of the 2016 cannabis legalization ballot measure, an expert on cannabis policy, an expert on cannabis culinary arts, an individual representing the interests of the adult use cannabis consumers, an individual representing the interests of municipal governments, an individual representing the interests of the adult use cannabis licensees, an individual representing the interests of the hospitality industry, an individual representing public health, and any other stakeholder the office determines necessary. No later than February 1st, 2025, the office shall draft a report that will be submitted to the legislature that includes recommendations and conclusions from the task force. These meetings and discussions, as I noted, will result in a report, depending on how these conversations go and the input that we get from our members and our members ex officio. We'll do introductions momentarily, and you already have everyone's bios in front of you. But first, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the wide range of experiences and backgrounds that are represented on this task force. It's a diversity that personally I'm very proud of, and I know my colleagues at OCP are proud of as well. We have members from Chambers of Commerce, Town Planning Board and Select Board members, National Restaurant Association member, National Fire Protection Association members, International Code Council members, Le Cordon Bleu Culinary Program graduates, board member of the Maine Cannabis Union, board member of the Beale University Cannabis Program, and a board member of AdCare Educational Institute of Maine. In addition, we have geographic representation, members all the way from Elliott to Fort Kent, including the municipalities Lewiston, Portland, Augusta, Bangor, Southwest Harbor, representatives of both big and small Maine cannabis businesses, a handful of individuals who have participated in previous OCP work groups and task forces, and also a lot of new faces as well, which is important. And we have ex officio members from other agencies within state government. It's important to have such a diverse group of stakeholders, perspectives, and experiences represented in these discussions because this is a complex topic. And it's one that has come before the legislature multiple times. It's one that has come before a lot of legislatures across the country. And as legislators and regulators and other stakeholders dive into it, it becomes clearer just how complicated this is. Cannabis hospitality doesn't have a single definition. Making it happen, if it were to happen, is not going to be a simple light switch, a simple yes, no. The actual work of building policy anywhere in the cannabis space is very complicated, and nowhere is that truer than this. Before we segue into introductions and the rest of our agenda, there are a few housekeeping items I'd like to go over. It's important to keep things respectful. We ask that you please keep comments and questions focused on the issues we're here to discuss and to respect each other. This meeting is being recorded and live streamed. The video will be linked after the meeting on OCP's Cannabis Hospitality Task Force webpage, so please know that anything shared here today will be public record. Because we have a mix of people participating in person and online, we'd like everyone to try to raise their hand before commenting. Those of you on Zoom, you can raise your hand emoji in Zoom's reaction function, use the chat, and/or physically raise your hand on video so we can see it. I told my colleague Lexi to feel free to interrupt me in case someone on online has their hand raised and I haven't noticed, which is bound to happen. So my apologies for that. And if Lexi interrupts me or one of you, it's just to keep me on track. And so from there, I'd like to turn it over to our members for brief introductions. If you could just share your name, where you're from, your company or affiliation, and what seat you represent on the task force. We'll go in order of the membership list that came with your agenda. And so we're going to start with Sam.
Hi, everyone. Sam Tracy here. I live in Portland, Maine. My seat is the expert on cannabis policy. And right now I'm on sabbatical, so basically just serving as myself.
David?
Hi, my name is David Ferragamo. I'm from Waterford, Maine. I've been a private chef for over 10 years, and I specialize in helping people consume cannabis if they already have, and situations like that.
All right, Pablo?
Hey everyone, my name is Pablo Barajas. I live in Lewiston. I'm the owner of Liddy Ditties LLC. It's currently a medical cannabis manufacturing edible facility in Auburn, and I'm representing the culinary arts portion.
Rose?
My name is Rose Mahoney. I am the adult use representative, and I'm affiliated with myself.
Steve?
My name is Steve Rusnak. I'm owner of Full Bloom Cannabis. I live in Fort Kent. I am representing the adult use consumers, and I have 4 AU licenses, and I have a caregiver store in Fort Kent.
Chris?
Chris Beaumont. I'm the marijuana compliance coordinator for the city of Portland. Been in that spot for coming up on 3 years, and a newer position we have in the city. I am one of the municipal representatives here.
Great. John?
John Rio, Code Enforcement Director for the town of Wyndham, and I'm also representing the municipal interest.
Natasha?
Hi, I'm Natasha Johnson from Southwest Harbor and own Maryston LLC and representing interests in adult use cannabis licenses.
Michelle?
I'm Michelle Grossi. I am from Eyebrow, and I'm representing adult use.
Julie?
Hi, I'm Julie Cutting-Kelly. I own Emerald Elevation in Elliott, Maine. I also own Cure Restaurant in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and I am representing the culinary hospitality expert.
Nate?
Hi, everyone. Nate Cloutier. I'm with Hospitality Maine. That's a statewide trade association of about 1,400 different restaurant and lodging establishments all across the state. I do their government affairs work here in Augusta and DC as well. Looking forward to working with you all.
Anne?
Hi all, Ann Sedlak. I live in South Portland. I'm the Director of Advocacy for the Maine Medical Association, which is a trade association for physicians, about 4,000 members. And I'm one of the public health representatives on this task force. I also wanted to apologize in advance. I have to be off camera and then offline for about an hour of today's meeting, but I'm looking forward to catching up. Thank you all.
Amy?
Hi, my name is Jamie Comstock. I'm the Health Promotion Manager at Bangor Public Health and Community Services, and I'm a public health representative.
Great. Jennifer?
Hi, my name is Jennifer Kelly Young. I actually go by Jiffy, and I live in Sebago, Maine. I will coordinate the Substance Use Prevention Services Program at the Division of Public Health for the City of Portland, and I'm here representing public health.
Sorry, Jiffy, I'm an autopilot.
That's okay.
Heather?
Hi, Heather Sullivan. I live in Hollis. I'm representing the Adult Use Cannabis Campaign, and I also work for a large MSO in this space.
Next, I'll have our ex officio agency representatives introduce themselves for those who are present. Lauren?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Lauren Stewart. I'm the Highway Safety Director here for the state of Maine. We're located under the Department of Public Safety, and our mission is to reduce fatalities, crashes, and serious injuries resulting from motor vehicle crashes. Thank you for being with us today.
Scott?
My name is Scott Maddox, and I am a contractor for the Maine Bureau of Highway Safety. I serve as a traffic safety resource prosecutor, and my job is to educate law enforcement and prosecutors across the state about cannabis impaired driving. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I look forward to it. Thank you.
Lexi.
Hi, Lexi Perry. I work for the Maine CDC in the Tobacco and Substance Use Prevention and Control Program as a certified prevention specialist. So I will be representing, I guess, some of the public health space.
Okay.
I'm Ben Metcalf. I'm the inspection program manager for Maine Department of Agriculture, and we basically license all the food manufacturers and then processors in the state.
And last but not least, Lisa.
Hi, everyone. Lisa Silva, Health Inspection Program Manager at Maine CDC. And we license and inspect eating establishments such as restaurants, mobile food vendors, things like that.
Excellent. And also from the Office of Cannabis Policy, we have in attendance Lisa Roberts, Gabby Pierce, Lexi Susi, and Tracy Jacques. Sorry, Tracy Jakes. Whenever I text Tracy from my car, I have to say Tracy Jacques, or Siri has no idea. And so it's become a habit. Sorry,
Like,
Tracy.
been saying it right. I know.
That's really embarrassing.
My French father is very proud of you.
So next, I'll briefly go over the agenda and the plan for today's meeting. First, we're going to talk a little bit about the cannabis hospitality footprint in the national policy landscape. We'll talk a little bit about what other states are doing, what other states are planning to do, what other states are not doing, but also interested to hear from any of you who have some experience, whether it's direct or indirect, in terms of working within or visiting cannabis hospitality establishments elsewhere. We'll take a brief break from 2:10 to 2:25. We'll come back and we'll discuss cannabis hospitality in Maine, what we've labeled as vision, opportunities, and considerations. From 3:40 to 4 o'clock, we'll talk about future meetings and what we'll be discussing and gather some feedback about this meeting. And then we'll be mindful of everyone's time and be wrapped up by 4 o'clock. So first, I'd like to jump in and talking about the national footprint for cannabis hospitality. Among your handouts, we have a few pages from the Marijuana Policy Project that outlines what some of the states that have cannabis hospitality programs or licenses in them look like, what they do. It's important to note that the states listed here include states that have passed laws and not yet implemented those programs. So it's not that you could go to any one of these states and visit an establishment. We went through, not we, but Marijuana Policy Project went through and identified all of the authorization that there is. So in some states, especially the newer states, those programs have not quite gotten off the ground. What you'll see among these states is a lot of variation. A lot of variation in a variety of ways. What types of establishments are allowed, what the rules within those establishments are. Some states ban smoking, some states allow it, but in certain structured circumstances. Some states don't allow food, some allow the production of food, some allow prepackaged food products to be sold. There is a lot of conversations in the states that engage on this issue around alcohol policy. Should alcohol be present at these establishments? If it is, what are the restrictions that are placed on it? Some states will allow the sale of both cannabis and alcohol in the same establishment, but you can only consume one. if you're in there. So in some states I'm familiar with, you essentially get a wristband when you walk into an establishment, and that identifies you as an alcohol consumer or a cannabis consumer. And that's an easy way then for the establishment to distinguish. What I will say is, while I have never built a program around cannabis hospitality, in my previous role at the Brookings Institution, we had a partnership with the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and the Las Vegas community did ask me for my input on these issues. One of the things I was most impressed by in what was a years-long conversation in Southern Nevada about cannabis consumption lounges was just how detailed the participants got, whether it was private business, whether it was some of the consultants that worked on it, the Clark County Commission, the City of Las Vegas, the Nevada legislature. The more they dove into it, the more they started to understand a lot of different considerations. I do hope that this task force is able to engage. And those considerations cut in a lot of different directions. Some of them very public health focused, questions about what happens if you allow smoking in an establishment and someone has a medical emergency, they trip and fall, or they have some unrelated health problem that pops up, and first responders have to enter that space. How quickly can you evacuate air? How can you make sure that that's a safe environment for first responders or other individuals who need to enter that space? At the same time, in Nevada, there were a lot of questions about how does the business model work? So in addition to some of the public health and public safety concerns, how do you build a program that will actually be functional? And at the second to last, two CANRA conferences ago, the Cannabis Regulators Association, it was in Las Vegas, and part of the experience was for members who went to be able to tour a consumption lounge. Now, at that time, none of them were open. We went to one that was a couple of months away, Gab, right?
It was end of the month. They were gonna open at the end of the year or on New Year's Day, and
this
then
was the
everybody else
first
was gonna
week
open on 4/20.
December.
Yeah.
That's right. And so we didn't actually see how it operated, but the space was effectively done, and we were able to walk through. And one of the concerns that the licensee expressed was, we're not sure whether this is going to be able to make it from a financial perspective. And so the last thing I think any of us wants to do if we move forward with policy is to design something that is inherently going to fail. And we know in the cannabis space that can happen. In any part of public policy that can happen. Having looked at some of the proposals that were out in Nevada early on in particular, they were certainly going to fail. And so thinking through the particulars from all perspectives is an important part of why we have this diverse group. But it's also important to note that, like any establishment, whether it's a cannabis establishment, whether it's a bar, a restaurant, what have you, it's important also to understand how that establishment fits into the community in which it would operate. And so what the community expects, what the community is concerned about, these all get built into the programs that are on this list in front of you. I won't say that any of them are perfect. I won't point to one and say, well, let's just copy and paste that. One of the things that this state is very proud of is that it's a unique state and it does things its own way. And certainly what might work in Alaska or California or Minnesota might not work well in Maine for a variety of reasons. And so we put this in your packet, this document, just to give you an idea of the overview and not necessarily to say that the answers to all of the questions that are going to get raised in this task force can be found in this document. And so I've talked a lot for about 20 minutes now, but I'd like to turn it all over to you, I guess, with a show of hands in the room and online. How many of you have been to some sort of cannabis hospitality establishment? Just OCP? Just that. All right. Who knows people who have, or have colleagues, or anyone who's worked in it? Okay, a bit more. So let's, Pablo, I'll start with you. Tell a little bit about what your I guess, indirect experience of
Yeah,
this.
totally. So I actually have friends that visited Smoke and Mirrors in Vegas, and they were talking about, is that where you visited?
Yes.
The spot? Yeah, and it looks amazing, and it's just been so interesting to kind of research all the different establishments that are all around and how they differ so much with their offerings. And so I was kind of falling down this wormhole of state by state, seeing like what they offer, and they're all so unique and so different. But that's my only indirect experience, is just a friend that had visited that one establishment in Vegas.
Got it. And for those of you, to give you an idea of the layout of Smoke and Mirrors in Las Vegas, you walk into what almost looks like the lobby of a hotel. It's sort of long and, polished floors. It very much looks like a hotel. And then down the hall into, there's obviously an ID check station, and then down the hall to the right opens up to a fairly large retail store. I would say larger than anyone I've been in the state of Maine. Perhaps one of the largest I've been in, period. There have been a couple others in Nevada. Of course, they do it big. It's the entertainment city, right? And you can, do your shopping there. From that sort of hotel style lobby, to the left of it is an entirely separate lounge, consumption lounge that allows vaping, smoking, dabbing, and infused culinary, if I remember. And what you do is you purchase from the retail shop, and then they bring it through the back, and it's served to you in the consumption lounge. So just to give you an idea of the layout of that place and the way that works. Julie, did you raise your hand?
I had a girlfriend who lived in California for a while, kind of like the Humboldt Valley area and stuff. And she said it worked very well as far as how they have it going, and then just other friends that have been to Amsterdam and stuff. But yeah, as far as the inner workings, I don't know a whole bunch about it either, so I'm so excited to kind of learn.
Sure. David?
I think Pablo stole mine.
Okay. Lisa, did you raise your hand?
Just that I've known of people going to not.
Well, I will add that it's not in the United States, but I mean, I've chosen Jamaica as a travel destination because there are no regulations. And while I don't agree with that, I also don't complain about it when I'm there. That if I can sit in a bar and have a red stripe and smoke, then it's an appealing thing. Or I can sit by a pool and smoke and not worry that anybody's going to be staring at me. Whether I am a medical and recreational user, and sometimes I need it and sometimes I want it, and that's kind of how I differentiate. So I as I said, unrestricted use, not a good idea, but I think we got to ease up a little bit and let the restrictions match the current practice.
Can I dive into the experience a little more with you, Rose? So is it the type of situation where you bring your own with you, and if you're sitting at the bar, you can light up a joint or whatever, or do they actually sell it in the establishment?
No, you can buy marijuana anywhere in Jamaica. There are stores, and there's also 9,000 people walking down the beach offering to sell you marijuana, and people come into resorts. They try to regulate it by keeping Jamaicans out of resorts, but no, you would just bring your own, although there are medical and recreational stores. If you're not comfortable buying on the street, my taxi driver, here's my supplier.
Did you find that a lot of places, a lot of private establishments would restrict it, or is it pretty open?
In fact, when Americans go and they'll get up from the bar and go out onto a patio or out by a pool to smoke. I mean, Jamaica's not really indoors anywhere, but to be away from the food service area or whatever, they would go off and smoke outdoors. And the bartenders, the folks who are working there, they laugh. They think it's very funny that people feel like they would have to get up and get away from the table or get away from the bar to do that. And that until Americans, or I'm sure from other countries too, have been there and understand the sort of openness around it, they tend to sneak out behind the tree or whatever.
Gabby and Lisa or Lexi.
Sam had a hand raised.
Oh, sorry, Sam.
Hi there. Yeah, I just wanted to chime in. I have not been out there physically to see any of them, but I do have a lot of expertise on the Colorado hospitality licensing system, they have a whole lot of different license types, which I know is one of our questions we'll be looking at, which I think is a really good idea. I know that there's one high society cannabis, they marketed themselves as the first cannabis bar in Colorado. And so, very much kind of a traditional bar experience there. They're selling it, you consume it on premises. But I know there were also some groups, I don't think they're open yet, but there were some folks trying to put together like a fancy Italian restaurant just with cannabis instead of wine. And so, some people will be interested in sort of a bar atmosphere. Some people will be interested in a food atmosphere. Some people will be interested in going to a paint bar or other sorts of things like that, where it's more activity focused. So I really like that Colorado has all of those different license types with some flexibility. Just need to make sure that it's not, too complicated to navigate. So California sometimes has too many license types, and so you want to, find the middle ground there.
So Sam, in your experience with some of those license types, is it sort of like what I described of smoking mirrors in Las Vegas, where you purchase, obviously the Italian restaurant would be a little bit different, but where you purchase on site and then what you purchase is served to you, or is it a place you can just roll into and sort of purchase at the bar, for lack of a better term?
Yeah, my understanding is that it's generally that you purchase it there and it's served to you. I know that if I'm recalling correctly, it was a couple years ago that I was looking at them, but they do have some regulations in terms of both the serving size and then how much you're able to consume while you're there. So they had kind of equivalency tables, just like we already have for purchase limits at retail, for smokable products versus edibles. And so there were some, and obviously a much lower limit just because you're consuming it all in one sitting, versus taking it home. So I think there were also some models where it could be bring your own. That was kind of the first time they attempted it. I know there was more of like a local kind of community driven one that Denver tried, but because that was only bring your own, I don't think anyone was really able to make a successful business out of it, since you'd have to charge such a large cover or something that it didn't really make sense. And when it comes down to that, a lot of the time, say if you're an arcade with a huge cover or something like that, a lot of people would just rather go to an arcade and consume beforehand. So if you're in that kind of a situation, you need to, let people consume on the premises and buy it there too.
Yeah, and that was part of the conversation in Las Vegas as well. About early on, there was this idea that, well, you can go anywhere and then you can bring your own there. And the questions around that business model popped up. As Sam said, like, do you have a cover charge, and what would that cover charge need to be? Does it become sort of like a members only establishment, sort of like what the way Utah managed bars before the 2002 Olympics? You had to essentially join as a member and become part of a club. And so whether food was the way to balance the business model, not infused food, but just to have food if you brought your own. And pretty early on, it became clear that the BYOC model just had a lot of holes in it. And just from a business perspective, whether you support that type of activity or not, just from a sheer business perspective, it just, most of the business owners said, I can't fathom an angle in which I stay open if I have something like that. Lexi, Lisa, or Chris.
I had a follow-up question just about a couple of the places, either maybe the high society or the smoke and mirrors. When you talk about it goes from like the back room over to the lounge area, do you then get to take that home with you if you don't consume it all? Like if I get a brownie, and I only have half my brownie, do I get to take the other half home? Or I just didn't know if anybody knew about that. Or I've never been.
It is different in different states, whether you get to take it to go see or have to consume on site, or
I think it's a pretty focal policy question for us to have. I think with smoke and mirrors, you could take I don't think you had to consume all of it on site. And so the way we didn't see sort of the back room part of it, but the way they described it was essentially having like cubbies based on who you were. And I don't know if it was a number-based system or it was a QR kind of system, I can't remember, but they sort of had your stuff stashed away for you, and then it stuck with you and then went out the door with you after. Is there anything else I'm forgetting about that experience, the business model, from that tour for the OCP team.
I would just add a little bit to the culinary offering. So they did a lot of testing about what beverages they would offer, and they made THC infused beverages with like a expert chef and everything like that. So that was going to be one of their main selling points. And then the other model, I'm not sure if they were actually going to be able to go through with that or if it was one they were just exploring. But it would be to have like food trucks outside and have the food trucks have a specialty like dressing or dip or something like that. So condiments that were infused with THC as well as an additive to just like your regular pizza or salad or whatnot.
Yeah, and I think they were working on whether the was it CCB out there was going to allow that.
Yeah, I
right?
think
It wasn't quite clear. I assume the answer has happened now. It's been 7 or 8 months. But yeah, their goal was a food truck system. Like you could buy infused edibles, brownies, gummies, whatever, like you would normally. But then you could have whatever food truck or food trucks pulled up on that day. They did have the benefit of having a massive parking lot with it, which Las Vegas style was shared with a strip club. But yeah, that was helpful to be able to manage that. Did you have something, Lisa?
Yeah, just the owner talking about the challenges and the cost related to the HVAC system that was necessary to be able to recycle the air at the rate that was necessary, given that they were going to allow vaping inside. So just thinking about, the equipment that is necessary to support the operation as well.
And then they also shared that what was required by the law was not engineeringly possible. And so they were requesting before even launch an exception to the air exchange requirements for indoor smoking at that particular establishment. Because of the way it was, they just could not get enough air exchanges per hour to comply with the requirements of the law.
Yeah. And they put a ton of money into that.
Yeah,
It was
ton.
I mean,
we talked about it a lot because they were very proud, and also it cost them a
I
lot.
think it was in the neighborhood of $1 million
Yeah, I was
just
gonna say
for
that.
the HVAC system for that specific
Space,
lounge.
yeah.
Yeah, and I would say this is going to be meaningless to the people on camera, so my apologies for this, but I think the entire lounge was probably 1.5 times the size of this room. And so $1 million for an HVAC system to manage that. And they still couldn't be correct.
What does it cost to run?
Well, it's Las Vegas, so I would imagine this week is pretty rough. I will tell you, I maybe in 2021, I think it was, I went into an indoor cultivation facility there, and this was until this week the hottest day in Las Vegas history, and it was 118 degrees that day, and the operator of that grow. Now, granted, a grow is going to require much more input for that sort of thing than a lounge necessarily would. But he said from April to May, his power bill doubled. From May to June, his power bill doubled, and this was July. He said it doubled again in July. And so it's tough to run these operations in the desert, and so that's an added layer of issue for that.
Especially if you're not selling the product outside.
Yeah.
If you're not, you're doing the DLC, like I said, LLC.
I just wanted to add one other thing because you sparked a memory when you talked about membership in a club. And I was very surprised. I was in Salisbury, North Carolina earlier this year, which North Carolina doesn't seem like a marijuana friendly place. But a club in Salisbury named the White Rabbit, they are selling THC infused beverages alongside cocktails, but the approach, the business model is member only.
Are they Delta 9 THC?
Yeah.
Okay, I was
Delta
gonna say
8, Delta 9.
because they're not.
My expectation is that it's hemp derived.
Yeah, I was gonna
Yeah.
say they're not, they're
Yeah.
not ready for that.
No, they are not.
No, it's not the same, but it'll do if you're there.
Yeah, no, I agree with you.
They're not ready there. It's probably the understatement. All right, anyone else on this topic? Any sort of questions or issues that these this sort of interstate conversation has sparked?
I just want to, I think it was David, it might have been Pablo who said it, that in my review and preparing for this, hospitality establishments are the most state-specific kind of policy around in this space. Like, so I think it's really important for all of us to think about what works for Maine. Like, we can absolutely learn lessons from other states. And let's think about what makes sense for Maine.
Yeah. One of the things too that really impressed me in talking to licensees in Nevada who were interested in we're getting into this space, we're interested in it, thinking about it generally. One of the prime issues for them, other than whether you can actually keep the lights on with this or whether it's just going to be throwing money into a fire, but their next biggest issue was the safety of their employees. And trying to understand what that means. Air ventilation is an important part of that, but other topics that they talked about involve things like just physical safety in a space. People get angry when they're together, and it's not, it happens in bars, it happens in restaurants, it happens at Target, it happens in a lot of places. And while they want people who have that sort of hospitality experience, not everyone they get has that experience. And so what types of training employees need, what types of measures you have in place to make sure that the peace is kept, especially in a place like Las Vegas where people go there to do things they wouldn't normally do at home. Those are important considerations, but I think those are considerations everywhere. And so thinking about employees first. I know our licensees in here definitely do that, but it was a huge part of the conversation in Southern Nevada around this issue.
I'm seeing a lot of the information is land-based. Have you come across anything that was marine-based, as in like restaurants like DeMillo's that floats on the water, or tours or anything like that can happen on water and not on land?
I think that's a great question. I've not heard of any of that. I will say the marine issue gets very complex. It has been an issue here in Maine. It was just recently a big issue in Massachusetts. And our colleagues in Hawaii, it's a very difficult situation. For the most part in Hawaii, if you are consuming cannabis on an island, that cannabis was produced on that island, because as soon as the wheels go up, the FAA has jurisdiction over the plane. As soon as you push off the dock, you're in navigable waters. The Coast Guard and the Federal Maritime Commission have a jurisdiction. And so that creates a whole lot of issues that I think a lot of states have shied away from because of federal illegality. But I think it's an important question in the long term too, right? Like, federal prohibition is not going to be around forever. And so I think with any of these, any policies that we're talking about, not just cannabis hospitality, thinking about what changes might happen post-legal federal legalization, those are critical, and I think they're key here.
And when I meant marine, I meant any water, so it could be
Sure.
fresh water too, not just marine. So
well, yeah, because if you do, like, out of Portland, there's the wine sales, there's wine food on them, and we've been on them, they're amazing.
There is an alcohol license, that is a vessel specific license.
Yeah. But I wonder if that's something we should
consider.
Yeah, because wine, that's for smoke or cannabis beverage.
And now gets you sick.
Maybe on a canoe.
All right. We're being very efficient with our time. Anyone else on this topic from OCP? Anything that I've missed?
In Portsmouth, we do have a big, very popular cigar lounge. I think it's Federal Cigar, and it's been open now about 8 years, but they did the big HVAC thing as well. I mean, I don't think they're super popular, but I think I might take a walk over in the next week and just kind of see their method on it, just as a smoking model, just to get some insight on that.
What were they called?
Federal Cigar.
So we went into one of those in Florida, and if I remember correctly, we had to purchase a product from them in there. You could, once you purchased, you could sit, they had lounge chairs and tables and ashtrays and whatnot, and you could sit and chat and you could smoke. But you couldn't walk in, if I remember correctly, with your own product and just.
I think that's how this one's set up too, and I think they have a special lounge for like members only, and then like kind of a dumbed down area for like walk-ins. So I kind of just want to see a little bit of their business model.
Yeah, they still have their own humidor section, but it's all rental, their own rental lockers.
Yeah, you know, things that the business model can upscale on and upcharge for different tiers.
And I think that's a nice model too. I mean, watching someone smoke a cigar for the first time is something to see. Right? The amateur cigar use usually ends poorly. And so, you know, thinking about cannabis consumers in the same way, like some people need a lot more how-to than a more seasoned user. And one of the things that we'll discuss toward the end of the meeting today, and we'll be doing in future meetings, is bringing in subject matter experts. And so I'm getting all of you to brainstorm about whether it's specifically who, or whether it's a sort of category of who might be able to, you know, chime in here for 10 minutes and tell us about what their experience is, whether it's about, you know, HVAC in a cigar lounge, or any of the many topics, subtopics that touch the work of this task force. Definitely get brainstorming, and obviously we don't have to make all those determinations in this meeting, and you can follow up with my colleague Lexi to start to organize those names and ideas as they come in. All right. Anyone online? I'm trying to pay attention to see if there are hands raised. Any input on this topic from anyone online who hasn't chimed in yet? Should we take a little bit of a break? Should we keep moving? What do you guys think? I mean, it is getting pretty warm. So maybe we'll chime out for like a 10 or 15 minute break, cool off a little bit, and we'll reconvene at 2 o'clock. Perfect. Great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Who is the
Minutes to rejoin.
They're here, they're just not on camera.
Oh, I got you. Okay.
Okay. We just want to make sure the audio is working for everybody.
All right, welcome back, everyone. For those of you who are online, we wish you were here in the room, but you should be grateful that you're not, because the AC in the building is currently out and it is very warm.
Sympathy for all of you down there.
Yeah, if you have air conditioning in your house right now, keep it to yourselves. I don't want to hear about it.
I got an open window and a fan.
And for everybody in the room, there is water behind Lexi.
All right, next we're going to jump into a discussion about the vision, opportunities, and considerations for cannabis hospitality. We sped through the first section pretty quickly. And so what I will say is I'm happy for this conversation to last as long as the group has things to say. But if we end before 4 o'clock, I'm not going to drag this out for the sake of hitting the schedule, especially given that it's 400 degrees in this room. This is the topic we'll spend most of the remainder of the session on today. We will wrap up at the end, as I said, with some ideas for next steps, future meetings, etc. But this is going to be the substantive bulk of today's meeting. And so I want to I did a lot of talking at the beginning. This is a section where I'm going to do a lot of listening. And so, because we definitely want to hear from all of you. And so I want to kick off the vision for a vision of cannabis hospitality in Maine with a very basic question, but it's a complicated question. That is, how do you define cannabis hospitality? What does it look like? As I noted at the outset, every state sort of has a different vision for it. And so I think certainly in front of the legislature, cannabis hospitality has focused on consumption lounges. And obviously that's going to be a big part of our conversation, and it should be part of this conversation we're talking about in defining it. But that's not all cannabis hospitality is. And so thinking a little bit outside the box is, I think, what this part of the session is for. So think about definitions or just general ideas. Tiffany, would you raise your hand?
No, but I have something. We talk about cannabis lounges quite often, and there are two things that my work with the Portland cannabis vendors and also with alcohol licensees, there's two things that have come up. The first one is alcohol licensees in the city of Portland, because we are known so much as like a food central, vacation spot. They both are worried about being in the vicinity of each other, where somebody may leave a cannabis store and then go next door to and have consumed something like on the sidewalk on the way by, and then go into a restaurant and not show any intoxication when they walk through the door, but within an hour they've already had their first drink and the cannabis is kicked in. Cannabis edibles, I should say. So that is one, and of course, and so the alcohol licensees are worried about people who've used THC going into their establishments, and it's vice versa. They're also, the cannabis licensees are worried about people who've been drinking coming into their establishments, and what does that look like, and how do we train them? That's the first thing, and then the other thing that Portland is starting to see are walking tours. But the vision that I hear people talk about is cannabis bus tours, kind of like they do brewery tours and such, like that, and how that might work. Is there specific pickup spots? Do people have to pick up at hotels so if they have a place to go, right, that kind of thing, so.
And so with a cannabis bus tour, I've seen this model in other places. I assume you're referring to like going to a bunch of different retail stores?
Well,
or-
retail stores now, but if there are,
Or lounge.
yeah, like tasting room type things.
Well, in a lot of places, they also have farms and, you know, we can go to cultivation and grow
Cultivation, yeah.
areas and processing and also looking at the entire industry.
And what does that look like, and what will the rules be around consumption on the bus, because that will more than likely happen under people's noses.
I was gonna say, I've gotten inquiries about a party bus model, separate and apart from tours, just
Yeah.
a party bus driving around.
Sam?
Yeah, so kind of my vision and thoughts about hospitality generally, here I can put my hand down too. I almost think, you know, I know there's a lot of controversy here and we're the hospitality committee, so or task force, so I'm sticking with that, but I almost prefer the phrase either social consumption or on-site consumption, since I think it's a little more all-encompassing about what is actually being talked about, although on-premises consumption sounds overly technical, so I get why people don't like it, but yeah, just the idea that people are able to not just purchase cannabis like we can in dispensaries and retailers, but actually consume it somewhere with other people, not at home. As other folks have talked about, and is so present in Maine, of course, there's a huge tourism industry, and it's such a big problem right now that people, you know, if you're staying in a hotel or an Airbnb, they can ban smoking in you know, in their space. You can't do it in public spaces outside. And there's really no good place that you are legally allowed to do it. So I think there is a big problem with people, you know, driving around. I smell cannabis smoke coming out of cars all the time in Portland. You know, walking around with my 4-year-old, I don't want that going on. So I would much rather have all of the consumption taking place in places where people are, you know, sitting indoors in a place where they're not at risk to anybody else. And so I think we should treat it basically like alcohol, and in that way having it be all sorts of different models. I love the idea of the tourism model. There are people who will nerd out about going to different cultivation facilities, touring a processing facility, and being able to, you know, take samples out with them, or if there is a consumption space there, just like people go on brewery tours and things like that. Also, I think allowing it in restaurants in some way is really key. So ideally, I love the idea of like the alcohol wristband or a cannabis wristband if you don't want to allow consuming both, having people be able to choose one or the other. Bed and breakfasts, you know, also a very common business in Maine. And so being able to, the bud and breakfast, as a lot of people brand it in other states. And so something like that is great. And also large events like concerts, having a smoking section or something like that, that's, you know, kind of cordoned off, especially if it's outdoors, is mainly what I'm thinking about. I think works really well. Or if you can have like a separate indoor space in an indoor venue that people can then move in and out of or something like that. But having like those sort of temporary permits, I think are really important. Same thing can go for, they do the like cannabis cups, the like basically grower competitions, common out in like California and Colorado. Those are a big event that a lot of people enjoy. And so allowing there to be, you know, explicitly allowed on-site consumption instead of the, you know, back in the day, it was basically incredibly widely done, but just tolerated and kind of haphazardly controlled. And so it's better to say, you know, if you give people a space, then they'll go to that space and do it, instead of if you ban it in the whole area, it's just going to be happening everywhere. And yeah, same thing with like arcades, paint nights, other sorts of things. People like doing activities. We have an arcade bar in Portland, an arcade cannabis consumption place, I think would work great as well. So yeah, giving flexibility for all sorts of different things where people can consume cannabis together in a social atmosphere, with the benefit of it being, you know, kind of supervised and regulated, and a good place for education of novice consumers too.
Thanks, Sam. Heather?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment a little bit on the challenge that was brought up around intoxication. So, when you have a cannabis consumption lounge or cannabis consumption site option and a bar option, that's no different than what's happening today. So, oftentimes, cannabis consumers are consuming cannabis before they go out to the bars. They're leaving the bar, they're going out to their car. I'm not in the Portland scene, but so I'm a little more remote, but it is extremely common to see people just go out to their car, um, go out to the parking lot in some cases, have a joint, and then go back into the alcohol facility. I think that potentially training bartenders to understand, they're looking for intoxication. It's not necessarily the number of drinks that they've served to someone. It's about showing up as intoxicated, and then a bartender having the responsibility of stopping additional consumption. So to me, that doesn't look significantly different, whether or not, because it's happening today. All over the place. Sam, you mentioned taking your 4-year-old out on the street and smelling cannabis smoke throughout the city. Very common. So for me, I think a lot of times, and I also think about the economic challenges that we touched on a little bit in a cannabis consumption lounge. Look, it's no good for me to go to a cannabis consumption lounge if all of my friends are at a bar. That's not going to work necessarily either. So, it might not be, it might sound scary at the front end, but I'm a big proponent of allowing mixed activities with proper employee protection and employee training to help mitigate the issues that come along with consuming both substances at one time.
Thanks, Heather. Rochelle?
Josh and I were just talking about that, I mean, there's definitely couples that work, one smoking and one doesn't. And so now you're saying, we're saying, or a lot of these states are saying that you can only have one or the other. I definitely agree with what she's saying. It comes down to education, and I guess we have to ask, where's Scott? There he is. What would that education look like? Because from our standpoint, I'm sure you've seen it, there are some people that can smoke oodles and they're not even, function, they probably function better than I do on a normal daily basis without smoking. And they do really well, and that's what's helping them get through the day. Then there's somebody like myself that see it immediately if I consume. So, how would we put those parameters, and what would we say? That's, I guess, Scott's area of expertise.
Scott, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I'm sorry, the volume wasn't very good on what the last speaker said. So if you could summarize, I'd be happy to comment.
So Rochelle had mentioned the sort of scenario in which you have couples, one who prefers to consume alcohol, one who prefers to consume cannabis. And so having a cannabis only lounge might create a scenario in which one person doesn't have access to what they want. And so Rochelle made the point about the need for training in a scenario, in that type of setting around intoxication and how that might present.
Yes, yeah, because what would we provide for training? The bartender can definitely tell now. I mean, I can tell when somebody's not too many drinks.
Yeah, so combining the last two speakers, my perspective would be this. I think that the first speaker made a lot of good points, as well as the one who just spoke, and I apologize, I can't see your names or anything. In that, there is a lot of mixed use going on. It's going to go on whether it's licensed or not. I absolutely understand that. And I think you're absolutely right. One of the ways of dealing with that is by having the proper training about impairment. Someone said it's about impairment. It's not about marijuana consumption. It's not about the number of alcoholic drinks consumed, it's about impairment. And you know, if this is going to happen, then from my perspective, it would be a mistake to let it happen without mandated training about over-serving. And you know, cannabis impairment is from a highway safety perspective is no different than alcohol impairment. If someone's divided attention is interfered with in a way that they can't safely operate a vehicle, then regardless of the source of impairment, they shouldn't be served anything else that's going to impair them. And that training can be very easily developed from, you know, the methodologies that we have now. But currently in the state, licensees of alcohol are not mandated to train their staff. And that's a huge mistake. And I think that if cannabis consumption lounges are going to be successful, that would be something that I think they should change. And I'll just close on one point. We know, someone else said very accurately, that there are some people that can consume vast amounts of cannabis and not be impaired. And there are others who consume only a little bit and become very impaired. And that's why training on recognizing serving is important. But the thing I'll close with is that there's not a lot of research and evidence about the effect of impairment when you mix the two. What little data we have shows that the mixing of the two exacerbates impairment. And until we know more about that, I'd caution mixing the two.
Thank you, Scott. I'm going to go Jamie and then Natasha. Take away.
Hi there. I just wanted to kind of plus one Scott there. Portland and Bangor require servers and sellers of alcohol to be trained in order to work within those city limits. And we have been, as prevention folks, really trying to move forward a similar cannabis focused, responsible server, seller, bud tender training. We have not been able to do that. And I feel deeply, and I'm sure others on the call also do, like Scott mentioned, and I know Jiffy would agree with me, that this is such a gaping hole in this system. And if we could figure out how to launch this and also require it, like Scott mentions, and also I would say require it for alcohol too. There are lots of holes in our alcohol system as well. So that's my plus one.
Thank you, Jamie. Natasha?
I just wanted to change the focus for just a second and throw out there that when we began the conversation, you had mentioned that it is always focused on consumption lounges. But again, I think to be more encompassing of our entire state from top to bottom, east to west, we need to expand that definition further to not just think about indoor lounges. What if you had someone that owned 50 acres that no longer wants to put up solar panels, but instead wants to do trails through the woods that you can use year round, whether it's summer and go hiking or cross-country skiing in the winter? If you are outside, it's a different kind of chemtrail. So anyway, just throwing that out there, that it would be good to kind of keep that definition or the verbiage looser. I mean, there is no way to really make it looser, I guess, but just to keep in mind that there's, I think, other ways to be able to license, regulate, and consume, not just on an inside indoor lounge space.
I will say, and thank you for saying that because I had forgotten, when I first heard about Cannabis Hospitality Task Force, and when I first read about it, I asked myself that question: what do we mean by cannabis hospitality? And the first thing that came to mind for me was mountain biking, hiking, kayaking, rafting. That's where, like, an outdoor activity, a lot of people who do those activities also tend to smoke weed. And not exclusively, of course. I mean, it's not an either or. But, you know, and I think, you know, in terms, so what is cannabis hospitality? You know, I would define it as a cannabis friendly environment. where, I don't think Airbnbs and hotels should allow smoking in the rooms any more than I think they should allow smoking cigarettes in the rooms, I mean, it's smelly, it can be. But if there's, a cannabis friendly sticker, Maine Office of Cannabis Policy sticker, and to say, if you decide to stay here, you may encounter marijuana smoke. If concerts and festivals, I love the weed tent idea. Restaurants, bars, if we ever got to the point of infused, foods and beverages, I mean, that you can always, put notice there. You can't take full responsibility for people who don't read. And then in terms of the education, I don't think that should be put completely on the shoulders of the people who are getting paid an hourly wage to serve these things, to sell and serve. And I know that sure there's training and there are responsibility things. I've never actually worked in the cannabis industry. But consumer education, I mean, myself, I will say, if I take an edible and it takes 45 minutes for it to kick in, like 9 times out of 10, I forgot I ate it. And then 45 minutes, I'll be like, what just happened to me? Yeah. And then I'll remember. But, I mean, that things like that for an infrequent or brand new user, I mean, that's information that you really need to help people understand up front. So, first time, maybe walk through whatever, but there has to be, I'd say the majority of the responsibility needs to be on the end consumer. And, in terms of mixed use, if you are familiar, if you happen to partake in cannabis and alcohol, and sometimes together, it can be done. The standard user knows their limits. They know, and they can choose to exceed their limits. And I'll tell you, outside of this conversation, the first time I ever made canna butter, it was funny. But so I just think sort of a more open, less restrictive environment. And the other thing that I thought of is dogs have specific hours on beaches that dogs get to use the beach. I want to have an hour a day that I can go to the beach and smoke weed and not be stared at by people with 4-year-old children.
All right, let's do Lexi, then John, then we'll jump to our culinary experts.
Going back to the training discussion, and I know Scott and Jamie and Jafik, we've all had these discussions. We do the responsible beverage seller and server trainings, and that impairment section is broad. It's not just like assessing impairment on alcohol. It is opioids, prescription. I mean, anything that you can be impaired on, because it's important to know how to determine impairment. And I think that's the same for what we're trying to stand up for cannabis. I think, we've been making progress on some of the training content kind of in anticipation that this policy conversation would be happening. The struggle there is where does the capacity to really stand that up come from? Because right now, like RBS is on the prevention field mostly. And so if this is a required training, how does that get carried out? Is it something that, certain folks are able to present, or is it something that is online? How does it get updated? Things like that. So I think that's a conversation there. And one thing I would say about the who's responsible for that training, is it the employees or the consumers? And I think one consideration there that's very important is the liability. I do agree that there needs to be some level of responsibility on a person who chooses to consume any substance, but legal liability is a thing. There's dram shop liability for alcohol, and I think that needs to be a consideration for cannabis as well. So I think while there is personal responsibility, there also needs to be that stipulation. And preparedness for those inevitable legal conversations. If somebody does leave a situation where they've consumed both, who's responsible for that? So. That's it.
Thanks, Lexi. John? And then we'll go to David.
Oh, you're on mute, John.
You said the most brilliant things ever said.
Can you hear me now? I just have a question. There's some pretty specific laws in the books, and you may have covered that earlier too, on smoking in public places. And I think it's just specific to tobacco. Is this group charged with looking, at outdoor and recreational as part of the recommendations too, or?
Well, I'll respond just by saying, I think so far in the room, we've heard that conversation pop up about outdoor. And so I think that's sort of incumbent upon us to think through laws would either need to be tweaked, changed entirely, or how those laws might interrupt any efforts in that space. So I think it'll be an important part of the conversation.
All right, thank you.
David?
I just was one kind of touch on what Rose said about people taking responsibility, because I've worked at a lot of dispensaries, and especially being in Maine at some really busy dispensaries, you get a lot of people that visit Maine that have never even consumed. You meet a lot of people that are afraid to ask you and talk to you about things and might just start doing it without talking to you. And then you have people that are super shy and ask you all these questions for like 45 minutes. So I do think there's a strong awareness that we need to have for educating people, because they're just gonna go do it. And if you can find that balance between impairment but also educating, because like I said, some people are just gonna do it and they know what they're doing, and then some people don't know what they're doing and they're still just gonna go do it because they're too afraid to ask. And a lot of the time when I was at the dispensaries and stuff like that, I've worked at like older demographics that are getting into it. They're like, oh, I haven't touched stuff in like 20 years. Like some of them are really afraid to ask. So they might just go ahead, go do things, and then that would turn out very bad. So there's a strong will for educating people on top of also being aware of impairment. So things like that.
Thanks. All right, Chris, then we'll go to Julie and then to Steve.
You kind of made the point, one of the points I was gonna make. We have heard it a couple times that it does seem like it's more than just like sitting in a lounge someplace. We heard about the water tours in the different parts of our state. I love the electrical field idea instead of another solar panel. Rose, you mentioned too, a cannabis friendly environment. One of the things that I was thinking about when this task force is the kind of the incorporation of a cannabis friendly environment and what we already have on the books for rules in the state. How do we make that fit, or what needs to change to make that fit, if that's the direction we're going to go. So I think it's more to me than just sitting in a lounge.
For sure. I think these are all great ideas. I feel like I've heard of like camping establishments that are doing it
So I
now.
was just gonna say that we do license Camp Laughing Grass.
I was just gonna say,
over
that's
there.
what I was gonna say, that's what I heard. I wanna go so bad.
Yeah.
So that's super cool. I mean, I think as far as restaurants for me, like, I think microdosing would be the biggest thing. On the back of all of our edibles, we have a sticker that says like 1 to 2.5 is like the very moderate user, 2.5 to 5 is, and I've had many people come up and be like, thank you so much. That was so educational. Like I literally was like, cutting the square into that. So I think a menu of some sort where it clearly states that moderate, experienced, professional user. And then this could be total hogwash. I don't even know if these things exist, but I heard somebody told me, is there the CBD, like, is there strips that can kind of counteract if you're like having a too much of it? Is there actually?
So CBD is like one of CBD and vitamin C. You can actually take to
Yes.
extract the effects of THC.
So maybe like that's a kind of like a little kit you have if
hand in
someone's
hand.
kind of, oh gosh, that maybe that was a little too, you're like, okay, here's a THC strip, or like you said, like I've heard about the citrus too, as well. So maybe that's kind of a cute idea for people that they could
I've
have.
seen that
kind
work
of a-
tremendously for people.
Yeah, like maybe that's something. And I love the bracelet idea too. Maybe it's like you come in and you say, all right, are you alcohol or are you cannabis? You got the red for the alcohol, the green for cannabis, and then the two separate two separate menus. And as a restaurant myself, like I would, if I had a restaurant in Maine, like, and I had a license, like maybe I would offer a menu that's like, if you have your salad, you want to have your poached pear salad with your vinaigrette that has the 2.5 milligram in it, that's an upcharge of this, or you know, whatever, the butter on your steak, or your chocolate dessert, as an upsell, because we were talking about the business aspect of making a living or making it a feasible business, that could be a way to kind of make it approachable to everybody, but it doesn't just have to be a cannabis business also.
I picture that plate being labeled.
Yeah.
Just like
Oh,
you-
for, oh,
any
yeah, for
restaurant
sure.
would have a gluten-free
That's,
thing,
yeah, maybe
everything
it's a
would be
specific
everything would
colored
be-
plate,
yeah.
yeah.
I also
That's
did
how it
the
should be.
ones for a push pear salad.
I just, that's on our menu right now, actually.
So I'm gonna go Steve, Lauren, and then Ben.
All right, so you know, I'm assuming that this is gonna follow the opt-in model, so it's only gonna be in municipalities that have opted in, right? And basically, you know, we need to consider geographical and cultural differences across the state because the county people are different from down east, are different from the Western Hills and so forth and so on, right? Towns have been, you know, reluctant to change marijuana ordinances because there's so much effort for the towns going into this. So whatever we come up with, if it does, you know, get implemented, it should be a clearly defined list of what's allowed, you know, so these towns can say they don't have to really put a lot of effort into creating their own ideas for things. As far as like from like the manufacturing standpoint, because we do manufacturing here as well, it would be really difficult as a manufacturer to stay within the current guidelines for the track and trace and package size and things like that. Like we should consider having adjustments because if we're going to limit people's portions for on-site consumption, how are we going to package that in manufacturing? That's going to add a lot of cost and effort and labor. Do we allow these facilities to break up larger packages and disperse amounts on site? You know, because if we have to do 5 milligram packages single serving for customers that at an establishment to eat it, that's going to be really burdensome on the manufacturers and deliverers and transporters and things like that. That's basically some thoughts that I had.
You, Lauren?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to jump back to the education topic real quick because, you know, we were talking about whether it's consumer responsibility or server responsibility, and it's both of those. But I just wanted to say, I think that there's also a responsibility for the state and the municipalities to work together to, you know, do a statewide educational campaign on, you know, what it means to drive under the influence of whether it's, you know, we've already done it for alcohol. Back in the 80s, we had a huge problem with people driving around and drinking at the same time. And over the last couple of decades, we've done quite a bit of education. People know what to expect now if they make the choice to drink alcohol and drive. They know what the consequences are. They know what the punishment is. And, you know, hopefully most people are making the choice not to do so. But we've already talked about today that we see it ourselves. People are consuming cannabis and they're driving, and they don't seem to acknowledge that there's this or understand that there is the same impairment when you do so. So maybe you take the edible and 45 minutes later on your way to the grocery store, you're like, whoa, you know, what happened to me? And so I think people need to be educated that driving under the influence of cannabis or driving under the influence of alcohol or a combination is also going to have serious consequences. And we'd rather put our money into educating people to make the right choice than putting our money into educating law enforcement to arrest people and then all the costs that compound on top of that. So I just wanted to throw that out there that, you know, if we do something like this, we also may want to consider investing some time, resources, and money into a statewide educational campaign. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. I'll go to Ben and then Natasha. But before we jump to Ben, the one example I have seen of that, Lauren, I believe is from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. They have a "If you feel different, you drive different" campaign, which, I mean, we all know when it comes to drugs, alcohol, cannabis, whatever, Like a lot of these campaigns are really bad and really kitschy, but I thought the if you feel different, you drive different was just a really straightforward, non-condescending way to get the point across. And your point is well taken, Lauren. I think there's a lot more that we can do from a state perspective on those issues. But that was one of those campaigns where I saw the ad or listened to the ad. I was in the car and I was like, oh, wow, this isn't stupid.
Yeah, right,
Kudos to
right.
USDOT on that.
Yes, and they actually did a focus group on that with informed cannabis users. So I think it worked well. And Maine actually grabbed a hold of that, and we used that slogan or social norming messaging as well. But it does take a long time for people to buy into some of these messages, unfortunately. And look how long it took for people to buy into the fact that, it wasn't a good idea to drink and drive at the same time or to drive after drinking. So I think we can expect it's also going to take a long time for people to really buy into the fact that, cannabis is as impairing. So I just wanted to make that point, and thank you very much.
So I was basically just sitting there thinking about the idea of training, and I mean, to Rose's point, there should be a point where training does need to fall on the consumer. But the problem from the regulatory side of the food world is that anybody that goes to a restaurant, there's always that part on the menu where you have the asterisk and consuming raw or uncooked products to be hazardous to your health. That does not do anything for anybody's liability. And every single restaurant, every single food business in the state generally falls under the premise that the ownership is required to train their staff. And this, we're talking, the hospitality side, we're talking about both cannabis as well as non-cannabis products. From a food perspective, we're talking about cross-contamination of non-cannabis products. And the amount of training that would have to go into not just training, but segregation in different areas is, no matter what, is always going to fall under the ownership, and to make sure their staff are properly trained for it, because you can't have somebody that's not wanting to order anything with any sort of cannabis in it and then them getting it, because then you have severe legal liabilities with that. So really keeping those two separated, is kind of no different than just adding more additional training for anybody serving, I guess no different than tips training per se for serving alcoholic beverages. But that idea of training it's not going to go away. It's really not going to get any less than anybody that has a business. That liability is going to be huge, and it's going to be burdensome on that business owner to train themselves and what can go wrong, and then train their staff. And then, anything in the food world, you have a high turnover rate of the staff. And so it's just a perpetual problem of train all the time. I don't know if there's any way for the group to get together, or, if the cannabis groups of folks get together and have some sort of training system that they can build. But one group, one works for this business, one works for that business, kind of co-opting together is going to be a really good idea for that type of business plan. But I just wanted to say that, the idea of cross-contamination would scare the heck out of me as a regulator, because you're going to have people that don't want to consume it. And if you have somebody that's working in the kitchen, no different when you say it gets busy in kitchens, and I can't fathom that any sort of, hospitality system, whether it's indoors or outdoors, is not going to have busy times too. It's really, it takes 3 times of doing a bad habit, that bad habit stuff. And I've always trained that it takes 3 times doing it, that bad habit stuff. It takes 3 months of correction of that employee every single time to make sure that bad habit goes away. And that's a lot of extra training to have to do on people. So, the idea of a little less regulation on it's probably not going to, at least on the food side of things, because cross-contamination is going to be a huge thing.
Natasha, then David?
I have 3 things.
Okay.
First one is to follow up on what Ben was just saying, and to touch on what Julie had said a little bit ago, with things in food service, which is outside of my realm, but looking at the topic, I would also want to make sure that there were age limits on table service. So I don't know what the age limits are on delivering alcohol to a table, but I would assume that would also potentially pose a problem with delivering any kind of food that had cannabis infused into it. So just wanted to mention that as a thought. The second one is following up on what Steve had said. Well, there are funds that are available from the state for towns that have opted in. I wasn't sure if you knew that from what you were talking about.
The opt-ins, you mean?
For communities that have opted in, there are state funds available to help reimburse them from that process.
Okay.
Yeah, through OCP.
Yeah. So would putting together hospitality in the cannabis realm, would that also have funds available from OCP for towns that wanted to implement that? Or once you're already opted in, is that part of that opted in package that those municipalities may have already gone through? That was my second one. And then my third one is going back to Camp Laughing Grass, Lisa. So I feel like we're all here talking about obviously what Canada tourism and hospitality is. So how is that licensed?
So it's licensed as a campground. No,
And then
not
how-
for food,
but how
it's,
is-
it's
yeah.
strictly a campground, and so the owner has a camp, it's down near the river, out near the Naples, Bridgeton area, and she has packages. So it's advertised, I just pulled it up on my website, it's advertised, she has packages, with, some with edibles, some not, just like, you know, water, drinks, things like that, but some come with, she provides edibles, provides them in the rooms. I don't know exactly the whole plan or how it actually works, but I can find out from our inspector and let you know.
Yeah, 'cause I just, it seems
But that
like
was just
that's-
another model that when you had talked about the water, I'm like, we have a campground that's doing this, you know, and then you're talking about the, you know, trails and you know, things like that. Hiking and stuff, so.
Just to be clear, you license them as just a
Campground,
not a
that's it.
marijuana campground.
Campground, strictly campground. So that's what we license campgrounds as well,
Yes,
as
yeah,
restaurants
yeah.
and lodging places.
Is that the whole like the Ziploc baggie is $40 and the weeds free kind of deal?
Sort of. I think we also had a B&B that either is doing that or decided not to do it. I'm not sure, but I can check into that one too. But those are the only two that come to mind right now that I know we have the campground license. I'm not sure about the B&B.
I mean, it's probably private property, right? Campground.
Yeah, yes.
But commercial.
It's a commercial, yes, she's using it as commercial property, but it's her private property, but I'm not sure if there's a membership either that goes along with it or not. So I'd have to check it out.
Before we jump to David, Natasha, one point on the opt-in funds. So is the laws currently written, if a town has already opted in and made use of those funds, they would not be able to dip back into it?
No, I didn't know if it would be a separate.
Sure. All I'm saying is if that is something that wanted to be entertained, it could be a recommendation of this
Absolutely.
group
Yeah.
to essentially, if you're opting in for a hospitality license and you have to go through some process to do that, that is an opportunity for a town to either dip back into that fund if they've already done it, or if their opt-in happened so long ago that they're no longer eligible to opt in, that it can be considered a new opt-in.
Or perhaps if they, you know, didn't hit the maximum allowed amount.
Sure.
For whatever they had originally received.
Yeah,
out of this
and so it would require a statutory change, but certainly something that this group could make a recommendation about if there was interest in. David?
Just to touch up on what Ben was talking about like cross-contamination and things like that and how things would work in the kitchen. I think we're gonna be looking at an overhaul system of how we think kitchens run. And I think the whole back of house is gonna get swapped out, and you're not just gonna be putting, oh, that one's getting dosed, that one's getting dosed. I think there's gotta be a much more written system of how things are gonna get tracked. And I think everything that gets consumed should be tracked in some way, shape, or form, but tracked all the way to that customer, not normal people are just bringing things out and things aren't just going right next to normal food and things aren't being prepared in exactly the same spot. I think we're going to be looking at an overhaul way that the back of house is going to work, in my opinion. So their cross-contamination that we're used to, like gluten-free stuff and seafood. Yeah, you can have the boards right next to each other and things are very close. I think it's going to be a step further from that. So I'm hoping that the cross-contamination will be much more dealt with and everything is followed through instead of just pushing plates out like restaurants normally do.
Okay, sorry. Who's next? I'm through the list that I had jotted in front of me. Oh yeah, we'll go to you, Heather. And then Lisa next.
Great, thank you. You know, I think as we continue to talk about the different types of hospitality, it might make sense for this group to kind of come to it's almost like we want to put out on the table all the different types of options that might be available, and then kind of decide if we want to include or exclude. So I'm thinking about what you were just talking about when it comes to restaurants. So, maybe as a group, we could determine, well, a restaurant, so here's what I'm thinking. A restaurant that exists right now, and they wanted to add a infused product offering to their restaurant menu. Is that something that we want to consider? Or is it, no, you have to be a infused product offer restaurant only? I think about it too a little bit when we talked about like mixing consumption. Would we want a bar that operates today to have the opportunity to add cannabis consumption, whether or not they were actually selling the product or it was on that bring your own that we talked about earlier? Do we want to consider bring your own opportunities? That might help get us to a point where we're better pinpointing what kind of education or other requirements that we want to also recommend.
Thank you, Heather. Lisa?
So I guess a couple of things, just to speak to what Heather was saying, to like bring your own THC cannabis into the restaurant. Is that what you were saying?
Sorry. My computer is working so slow today. That's why I'm on and off video. I can't hear as well when I'm on video. I think of it in a couple different places. So I think about, I think I mentioned earlier, when I go to my local bar and they have a smoking area outside, is there an opportunity for them to get a license that would allow them to also allow cannabis smoking? That they're not selling the cannabis, they're just saying, we're going to allow this, and our bartenders, again, are going to be trained to recognize impairment. Is that something we want to consider? Same thing with a restaurant. So when I think about bring your own, I guess bring your own is not as much of a factor in a restaurant, but it might be in terms of maybe the, a boat tour. Is the boat tour, you pay for the boat tour and you bring your own cannabis, or is the boat tour operator now also a cannabis seller? So I think, it runs the gamut of just trying to pinpoint for us what's kind of out of scope and what's in scope in what we're talking about when we define hospitality, cannabis hospitality.
So if they bring their own, they order their meal and then they add it to their meal, or are you saying that they give it to the cook? Because that would be a totally different thing that probably wouldn't be allowed in the code right now because it's not an approved source.
Yep.
And so there's two different issues right there that we could look at.
Fair enough. When I go to a restaurant, if I bring my own hot sauce, I can add it to my meal. So, and I'm not a lot of times the things that you'll hear from me are not necessarily ideas that I want to see happen. But I tend to, when one person makes a comment about something, my mind just starts racing and I start playing it out in other areas. So oftentimes you'll find that I'm doing that in these conversations. So when you just described that to me, I immediately go back to saying, there are situations, there are restaurants where you can bring your own wine. So why wouldn't there be restaurants that I can bring my own infused hot sauce and apply that to my, and would that type of environment require some kind of a license? Would it be a different license than someone who's infusing the product for me? Does that change liability? We talked a little bit about liability. So, I just start to think, I'm trying to take all the ideas that people have brought into this discussion and then think about how each specific item we talk about, how that would actually play out in the real world. And frankly, how expensive it would be to do it. Because I think that is a big factor in whether or not cannabis hospitality, legal cannabis hospitality, can be something that people can actually make a living at here in our state.
Okay, thanks, Heather. The other thing I had was the lounges. So these lounges, I'm assuming, would be like age restricted, so if vaping's done there, kids aren't going in and they're now breathing in. So I would assume it'd be like 21 and over or whatever it is, whatever the age limit is. That was just another thing I was thinking about. Currently, talking, I think, David, following up with your question, if someone has like a seafood allergy, restaurants are dealing with this now. They have to make sure that there's separation so it's not cross-contaminating.
And the manager brings up food
So
most of the time.
I'm just saying they have to currently do that, and there are errors. So sometimes there are errors. We hear about those things. And restaurants, as Ben said, they're busy. They're just so busy. They're going through staff, you know, left and right, not being short-staffed, just doing things very quickly. So there's, you know, we're already dealing, or I guess restaurants are already dealing with cross-contamination type issues, but you know, it takes a lot of focus and a lot, you know, to make sure things are done correctly. And then, let's see. I think that was.
So I've got Rochelle, David, Natasha, and then Ann, and then we're gonna transition a little bit to the next topic. Rochelle?
So in response to some of the things that have been said, two things came to mind. One is there's a lot of conversation about, and I mean, hospitality is such a broad definition. It's food and drinks, it's staying overnight. I mean, there's just so many parts to that. So where does this crossover lie between event licenses and hospitality licensure? Because some of the things that we've talked about would hold an event license as long as the city has opted in. So for us, like we operate in Manchester, I could seek as an adult use store. I could set up space, if anybody's familiar, our space there is massive. I could seek an event license for the location, hold an event. It doesn't mean that I want to host it every day. So where is that crossover and where is that definition going to lie? Because to the point of the Camp Dross? Sorry. That's just, to me, I mean, I guess it's a seasonal. Like, so then where do you get into that? Is it a seasonal license? Because that's only gonna operate here in the summer. How are we gonna make all of that mesh so that it's licensed properly? So that's first thought. Second thought is in response to the BYOC. I personally, like being in the licensee space, I don't see the benefit of BYOC. A business. In the business to make revenue, to operate so that my employees and I can survive. If you're BYOCing and it's not some sort of a private club, what incentive do I have to pay 5,000, 10,000, 2,000? And I'm not saying you guys per se OCP's fees, but I'm saying, I mean, Portland's license, for no offense, Chris, is pretty steep. So who, you know, who's going to spend that in that space? And then again, on top of it, BYOCing, yes, the safety and liability relies on quote unquote the consumer, but does it really when they leave your space? Because they're paying fee to be in your space. Well, there was staff there, they didn't oversee, nobody checked that I fell on the floor beforehand because I was sleeping, because I took too much. I mean, there's just a lot of nuances there that I don't know how that would benefit hospitality per se. I mean, it's a huge industry for the state of Maine. We want to take advantage of that during the seasons that we can, in the spaces that we can, whether it's skiing in the winter and, you know, being on the beaches and the coastline in the summer and the lakes. So I guess just some.
Can I ask a follow-up to Nate as a result of Rochelle's question? Is that okay? I'm just wondering, Nate, if you guys have a working definition of hospitality that you could help inform this discussion as well, because I think, I mean, obviously I like that we're all, I think it's important for us to have this discussion about what should fall under that umbrella. I'm also just curious if there's an existing definition we should be looking at.
Of just hospitality?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a lawyer. I'm always looking for definitions.
I think that's kind of one of those that's in the eye of the beholder.
Ah,
Depends on.
when you see it kind of deal. All right.
That's called a non-answer.
That is a moving target.
No definition in statute, but let me see if I can find something and bring it back to you.
I mean, I guess my question would be, are there, of the things we've discussed today, would any of those not fall under the work that Hospitality Maine does?
I mean, we're less focused on the outdoors aspect of, canoeing, hiking, trails, things like that. More focused around, brick and mortar restaurants and hotels. But the experience that comes with going to the restaurants and hotels, that is hospitality, after the fact when you're going on the hikes. That's the tourism and hospitality aspect. So it's really all intertwined. I know it's not the answer you're probably looking for. But I can answer somebody's question earlier too on you can serve alcohol at the age of 17 in a restaurant if there's somebody over 21 in a supervisory capacity. 15 and 16-year-olds are allowed to clean and bus and transport closed alcohol containers in a restaurant.
But you can't work in a retail establishment until you're 21.
For
Or-
cannabis.
Yes.
I've got David, Natasha, and then.
I just wanted to touch on this because I keep seeing brought up, but I don't think bringing your own in any capacity is a good idea, especially if it's going to be successful in any way. Like everything's already tracked with metric and everything. I don't see why that wouldn't proceed into what we're doing, especially if we're trying to track plates, track doses, see where the food's going. I think it's all still going to be in that realm. And if you're allowing people to bring stuff in, you have no clue what they have. They could have the original stuff on it. They could have tampered with it. If you don't know what exactly they're having, you're not in control of their impairment. I think we're taking a lot of things out of our hands when you're allowing that. So in my personal opinion, I don't see BYOC being successful at all, especially for a business owner. I do know that the state of Maine is so vast that, we're so consumed with what's happening, maybe in Portland and stuff like that, but I live somewhere where I'm in the middle of the woods. BYOC would probably be great. So this could be a little touchy, but if we're talking about most restaurant situations, things like that, I don't see it being successful in any way. Oh, sorry. I just see it being a little liability.
Actually, mine follows up really nicely after yours. If we can back up for just a bit, and can someone enlighten me, because perhaps I missed the information or perhaps it hasn't been discussed. Where would your wholesale cannabis come from that you are using in these establishments? So my family also owns a liquor store. And so, for example, a liquor store can sell spirits or liquor to a restaurant. That's where you would come to do your orders and do your pickup and bring back to your restaurant down the street. Beer and wine is a little different. We'd have a distributor usually that would come and help you with your draft lines and do all your stuff. So has it been talked about at all where that cannabis product would come from? Are you talking about a retail establishment selling to the hospitality establishment, or are you talking about doing the more beer and wine aspect version where you would be, the hospitality establishment would be buying directly from the cultivator?
Yeah, I think those are great policy questions. They're policy questions we're sort of tasked to answer, right? There's nothing in the law that currently would spell out specifically how that would go. And so I think part of building any program around this would involve having to, roll up our sleeves and think about this.
Where's the chain of command, so to speak?
Yeah.
Where's the trail?
Where
trails?
It would make sense to have a wholesale, to have that. Because, or would you, but yeah, you gotta go to a licensed
somewhere
facility.
either way. I mean, there's also not, depending on where you're located, there may or may not be a cultivation facility near you. So I think there's many more retail establishments throughout the state of Maine than there are cultivation facilities. So if they're already doing the distribution to those retail establishments, then does it make sense to work out something where you're able to buy at a reduced rate, like you would for spirits and liquor that are already regulated through the state of Maine through your liquor store model. You know what I mean? To sell that to the end of the hospitality establishment.
So I'm pretty sure right now retail stores can sell product as well as cultivation and manufacturing. So there would be 3 sources for track and trace product.
I just meant as far as availability.
Oh.
Where you physically are located. If you're down in Portland, you have a lot more opportunity and option to purchase physically closer to you. If, let's say, Julie's restaurant was crazy busy and she sold out and you needed to get more product immediately, but she was located up in Elliott, your options, you don't have as many options if you were located down in Portland to get product super quickly, was the point I was trying to make.
There are licensed brokers and stuff that actually make businesses out of that, out of being able to purchase from a lab directly to you. I mean, because if we're gonna do this, like, I hope that this gives everybody a business bump up. It's all the people that are kind of sitting on flour trying to figure out whether they put it into pre-rolls or what they do with it, that they can put into an extraction so that we can put it into our food. That hopefully, we would buy directly from the manufacturers, and they just have to decide how they're gonna extract it, or if it's going to be a lounge and it is going to be a pre-roll. But I think that just gives all of us in this space just that much more room to be able to get our products out to people and to expand our revenue, like you mentioned, because there's only so many spaces on the retail shelves right now, and we're all kind of competing to get in whatever shelf that is. So this is exciting.
And I feel like that comes into the business aspect of what we all do. I feel like that we need to be savvy about forecasting and look at what the demands are and what the needs are, and what did you sell last year. And then we all know that the 19 is the one. And we're back to reality now. And I mean, I'm sitting poring over books and sales and looking at numbers and what did we sell this month last year. Okay, 10% inflation, we don't know how to get that because people aren't stuff. I mean, there's a lot that's gonna go into it. It's not gonna be that. Try to start a business.
Anne, are you still online or have you jumped?
I am still on here. It was a comment from a while ago. I just wanted to endorse Heather Sullivan's comment about maybe picking one model and having us focus in on that. Because I think for me that there are so many different ways that this could be done. And there's also so many different, nuances that we need to think about each of those. And I just wanted to, maybe we send out a survey or people have their top choices of where this is piloted in Maine as an initial project that we work towards, having more options after we see how it goes. I think one of the things I've noticed in other states is sometimes you get in over your head. And I would just want us to do this thoughtfully.
Thank you, Anne. We'll jump to you in a second, Sam, but we've got about an hour left, a little less than an hour left. One of the things, I'll sort of group them together that I'd like to talk about. We've touched on them a little bit so far, but thinking about what are some of the opportunities that cannabis hospitality creates, and what are some of the concerns and the other types of considerations that we need to think about. So with that prompt, I'll get you guys thinking about that. But Sam, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, just to join in on a couple of the different conversation threads that have been going. And the bring your own question, I agree. Philosophically, I always want bring your own to be an option and at least ultimately to be one. But I do agree that there is much less of a compelling business case there and much more difficult to build a business around that. So especially if we are, limited in our resources of how many recommendations we can make, And if we have to pick, I'd much rather, go for the on-site sales model and leave bring your own for later than vice versa. Ideally we could do both, but I understand our resources are limited. Because also realistically with bring your own, not only is it tough from a business model, but if it's bring your own for smoking, and people are, you still need to have all the public health regulations about, ventilation and stuff, which can be very expensive. And if you're not coupling that with on-site sales, it's really hard to get the revenue to bear those costs. And then if you're only talking about edibles, realistically, bring your own edibles is something that people do all the time right now. You go to the movie theater and people will consume right beforehand or something. So realistically, giving some legal option to get a permit to allow someone to do that isn't going to be a big change either for consumers or businesses. It's just going to be an extra expense. So I think that it would be kind of safe to punt on that one. On the other hand, about the question of the, for lack of a better term, kind of the different levels of distribution, my understanding in Colorado, at least, and I think in most other states, is that hospitality on-site consumption businesses are treated effectively as a specialized retailer, so that they would be able to buy wholesale from cultivators or processors, not ones who are kind of a tier below retailers who would have to buy at retail price. I'm totally comfortable with the idea of allowing them to buy from retailers if they wanted to, but I'd want to make sure that they're still able to buy at a wholesale level, since it might be tough for them to be operating in this new sort of business model. And so adding in an extra cost of having a unnecessary middleman in the form of a retailer, I'd be very hesitant to dive into.
Thank you, Sam. Okay, some opportunities and concerns for his consideration.
John Rio touched on it when he was speaking, but he talked about the state's indoor smoking rules that we already have on the books. And I do believe, and I can be corrected, I think that includes marijuana already through the vaping definition. But I think to have that kind of brought back to this group is, I think that's going to be a big piece of the puzzle, no matter how we're looking at this. So I think for that to be brought to our next meeting will allow us all to kind of look at it.
Scott?
Thank you. I just want to briefly bring up a concern. And I think that if the cannabis hospitality idea here wants to have the credibility that the established alcohol has, I think that also liability-wise should be held to the same standard. And I think that there should be a Dram Shop Act for cannabis liability. So the same liability issue that's under the Maine Liquor Liability Act should also be established for cannabis. If we're going to do this, and we're going to hold people accountable and servers accountable, there ought to be civil remedies for people that are injured by reckless people that consume irresponsibly. And that also, by the way, is a factor for folks who were talking earlier about whether or not you should have a hybrid model. If you do have a hybrid model and you allow alcohol consumption on site of cannabis, then the Liquor Liability Act would apply. So you are bringing in a whole lot more liability if you do that. So just something to consider for, the concerns moving forward.
Scott, Lexi?
So, I mean, I have a few just from the prevention and public health space. The smoke-free one is a big one. And I think you mentioned before that Nevada was already running into, even before they opened, like the policy was too restrictive to even have availability of equipment that could keep up for HVAC. And I would be interested in seeing where the language for their policy came from, like what science is that backed in? Because if it's a matter of like already having to lessen up on evidence-based, like fine particulate matter, I don't love having to back down from that because that's what keeps people safe. And I think not everyone that chooses to be in a cannabis hospitality space is maybe choosing to smoke. And so they may not want to be exposed to that smoke or vapor or whatnot. So that's one big one. Age gating, the 21 up, I think listening to the list of like, what could this look like? How do we still protect the young people? I think, you know, having restaurants that currently aren't serving cannabis products and then adding that, like, so do those become now only 21 up, or is it now that, you know, a 5-year-old is going to be suddenly in an environment that people are consuming both? And I understand they are with alcohol now, and I have a lot of issues with the alcohol statute, so I'm not going to say that that's fine, but cannabis isn't, because I do have issues there. So that's one. I've been thinking about like the promotion, because I think a lot of things like how do we promote a cannabis hospitality, any of these ideas, outdoor, indoor, party bus, B&B, whatever, without also crossing that line where it's like being promoted to young people. So I think that's a consideration, especially with the new language. And then this might be naive of me. I'm just thinking like restaurant wise. And I think Julia mentioned like a menu of like, this is, you know, 2.5 to 5 or 5 and up. How does like homogeneity of a product come into play there? I'm just thinking, like you mentioned butter on the steak. How do you ensure that like this amount of butter that's put on your steak is within that like moderate, but then for this person it's more experience? Like how does that
Oh yeah,
work?
no, and I didn't mean like I just meant like on our edibles now, we've got
Okay.
that for people to see as they're eating like a chocolate bar. I mean, and again, this is all brainstorming, like, 'cause
Right, yeah.
I have no idea whether, and now you saying having children, I didn't even think about that. I was like, oh my gosh, yeah, no, you don't want, you know, truffle fries with, and then the kid grabbing it too, so that makes a lot of sense. I kind of am retracting on that idea. Now I'm kind of thinking maybe it should just be a restaurant that is specifically licensed, that is like that. I've changed my tune on that. But by your weight, just like you would a gummy, like if a gummy is a 5 gram gummy and you've had it tested, because everything has to be tested, that you know that's a 2.5 for the, and you have it portioned out and like you said, kind of
I
treats it that way, too.
picture certain type of serving spoons, you know, restaurants are already using them.
Yep.
And must be regulated. There's gonna be a lot of changes. I can already see it.
So dressing some sausage on the side.
And there's different concentrates now that.
I don't know if we're dealing with this, but I'm just super curious because I've dealt with it. What happens to medical patients that are under 21 and stuff that think that they're gonna be involved with trying to get in any establishments or doing stuff like this? Are they just ruled out?
Yes.
We're not even dealing with any of that, right?
So what I would say is our charge here is strictly for adult use. And
Okay.
so currently the adult use statute is 21 and up. And so if you were a 19-year-old medical patient, in the same way that you couldn't go into Rochelle's AU store and purchase, that law is currently written would apply to any of these hospitality establishments.
I'm just curious. I've seen all walks of life with under like the age of that people normally consume.
Can I throw a wrench into this?
Sure.
Go for it.
We're here for it.
Am I correct in that the regs are changing, where people can bring their children into the stores? Because, I mean, to be honest, I always felt funny about here comes mom and the 5-year-olds in the car, because that's unsafe. And if I remember correctly, that's coming to fruition. So what, I'm playing devil's advocate, what's the difference between bringing the child into the store to purchase or bringing it into a restaurant?
That's a great point. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
One's for on-site consumption, one's not.
Yeah,
Then you
One's
really
a
have to figure out the
transaction,
inherent
one's an
quality
experience.
situation.
Yeah, I mean, it's, but it's
If you refer more
consumption.
to restaurants, right? Like not bringing a kid into a smoke lounge.
No.
But.
There's like a cake copy in the corner.
Yeah, no. That's what I was thinking as a restaurant, because it is, I mean, to your point, I mean, since my kids were little, with my dinner.
But there's no accidental consumption when you're walking into a retail store, everything's sealed. It's not like you
True.
have samples out on the counter.
Yeah.
Where using Julie's example of you're having the truffle fries on the table and the 5-year-old reaches over and grabs one, like my kids eat my food all the time.
Very true.
But walking into a store, there's nothing out available.
Right. But how do you keep your product safe at home?
Hopefully the parent is locking up there.
So just have a plate that has sides on it.
I was gonna say,
like-
we're distributing thousands of safe storage
Yeah,
bags
I'm
across
just
the
trying to
state.
think of all the options that I know will come up as time moves forward, because those things will be asked.
Yeah.
Please, we'll do Rose and then Sam and then Nate.
So, opportunities. I mean, a lot of the opportunity that I hear honestly is to put some parameters around a lot of stuff that's already happening. You know, whether it's infused hot sauce that you bring into your own restaurant. It reminds me, my daughter always brings malt vinegar because not all restaurants have it. Her boyfriend keeps it in the car. And, you know, so, smoking on the street, it's illegal. It happens every day in Portland. You can't go anywhere in Portland and not smell someone smoke weed. Or outside a bar or, anywhere. You know, if cigarette smoking is allowed, people are smoking marijuana there. I mean, I'm no law enforcement. I don't work for the state, so I'll just tell you the truth. And then the concern, and this is a very fine line, but, over-regulation. In my very little exploration around these topics, I left a job in April, and this is my new interest. That proceeding in a way that provides equal opportunity to everyone who's even currently in the business, small or big. And, some of that is the financial regulations that go along with that. And the licensing fees are quite high, and also what I've heard from the few people I've asked is like some sort of liaison arrangement between OCP and these other constituent groups. So when, if a municipality is having a difficulty or is creating too big or too insurmountable set of regulations for a cannabis business to operate, or that there's more assistance for people to do this. And I think as cannabis grows, whether we call it tourism or hospitality, it's a wonderful, wonderful opportunity for the state of Maine. I mean, I just see it as a real expansion opportunity for something that we are already doing. Vacation land with a twist. It's so I'm very happy to be here. I have, I'll leave here today with more questions than answers, but
that means we're doing it right.
That's right. And so thanks. I think without overregulation, putting some guards around stuff that's already happening and saying, yes, you can do it here, no, you can't do it there, or whatever.
Before we jump to you, Sam, Lexi, let me know Anne's hand was raised first. So Anne, do you want to jump? Then Sam, then Nate.
Sure, but I wouldn't have minded either way. I'm here to be maybe the public health Debbie Downer about a couple of thoughts, which I don't mean, but I'll be here because that's why I'm here. First of all, I'm uncomfortable at any idea of smoking. Maine has pretty robust smoke-free laws. It's in, I looked up the statute, I'm sure we have it referenced somewhere, but it's Title 22, 1542. And I think we really need to be mindful of respecting that. I know the initial version of this LD had looking at kind of carving out a way to smoke for this possibility, and that was taken out. So I think, really being mindful of, if we are going forward with this, not trying to skirt around the important protections that are in place around inhalation, whatever you might feel around that with cannabis. And then I just think the other piece is I think the age restriction piece is something that we're concerned about. Minors having access to any type of substances can affect their brain development. And I think we need to be really cautious of this, that, this should be something that adults who are knowing, what they're doing are able to consume, and being mindful of that as we move forward with this. So it's something that can be, celebrating the industry and not something that, public health is concerned about. But those are just my initial concerns. I'm sure I'll keep raising them for you all.
Great, and Lexi has a quick follow-up on that, but before we do that, OCP's Lexi, we'll have her circulate the what is the Indoor Clean Air Act, that's what it's called in most states, to the group, so you guys can put your eyes on the actual language of that law. I think it'll help us understand what constraints exist, et cetera. Lexi, then we'll jump to Sam.
And I just want to say there are actually a couple of references, and I believe 28B 1502 to the restrictions on personal consumption. So just so you know, those are also not, we'll circulate those.
Yeah, I really appreciate the concern about the smoking, and honestly, this is where I have a lot of heartburn about the whole concept in general, because agreed, but also then that leaves you with more like edibles and products that take longer to kick in, and really thinking about the flip side, like the impairment driving home. Now your time of, when you might be ready to drive from a safe perspective is lengthened. And so I do think that that's a consideration of, like, there's maybe from a public health and safety perspective, there's a downside for both smoked products and consumed like orally. So I just think that's something that we'll really have to consider both sides of and how that plays out.
I'll add that we're concerned about that too. They have some like designated driver programs in other states that I think are pretty cool models as well.
Got Sam, Nate, Pablo, and Chris.
Yeah, thank you. So once again, kind of two different conversation threads here that I'd like to comment on. I'll hit on the smoking side first, since that's the most recent one. Conceptually, I feel very strongly that we need to allow some sort of consumption by inhalation in these businesses, but I'm not wedded to that being smoking necessarily. I think vaporizing is a reasonable thing to perhaps maybe for outdoor, it can be smoking or vaping. Indoor has to be vaping, something like that. I know this is a very interesting topic just because I'm actually traveling in the UK right now, and when you go past the store, you know how in the US we have the Surgeon General's warnings about smoking's bad for you. They actually have signs in the windows saying vaping is at least 95% less harmful than smoking from their equivalent of the Surgeon General, because the data does show that vaping in terms of cancer risks and other things with your lungs, it's not, neither is best in a health perspective, but vaping isn't as bad as smoking. In the US, our public health community, including the FDA, I think wrongly, unfortunately, does tend to lump the two in as both are bad and therefore should be treated exactly the same. Well, I think it is a lot more of a spectrum. So I think it's important to have inhalation as an option, just because the quicker onset and also therefore the quicker being not under the influence, I think is important, since edibles can take a long time to have onset and have a long duration. So I think that's important, but I don't know what Maine's smoking law that was referenced, if it is specifically smoking or if it lumps together vaporizing and smoking, but I'd be happy making that distinction ourselves if we have that sort of legal opportunity. And then the other question, getting back to, children in restaurants, for example, with food products. Again, I think kind of returning to the core concept of treating this like alcohol when possible, while recognizing the differences. And with alcohol, currently, you can go to a restaurant that serves fruity cocktails that would be delicious to a child. You can get served them, and it's both the adult's responsibility who ordered it and, to not give it to the kid, because that's illegal and, unhealthy. So they need to maintain control of that and not have their toddler grab it and think that it's fruit juice. And at the same time, I'm not an expert on this aspect, but I imagine if an employee saw this negligence happening or an adult, then giving it to someone who is clearly under 21, or just who hadn't been carded, that, they'd have a responsibility to intervene and to, maybe at least stop it, if not, notify law enforcement. I don't know the details there, but there are some layers of responsibility that I think should be just kind of the same if it was, say, a cannabis product that was a food item, that would be just as attractive to a kid as a fruity cocktail that looks like soda. And I think one other thing that we can do to help mitigate the impact of if that does ever happen is, limiting those the serving sizes. It's been talked about how, someone who consumes cannabis every day might eat a 25 or 50 milligram edible and have the same effect as someone who has a, 2.5 or 5 milligram edible, because they're a novice consumer. I don't think that we should be serving 50 milligram edibles, even if someone, somehow attests that they can handle it, because then that risk of, accidental consumption, either by mixing up plates or a kid grabbing it or what have you, that risk, the downside of that risk is a lot bigger. So that's one other tool that we have of, say, these are limited to 5 milligrams, 10 milligrams, whatever the number is. And then if you are someone who needs 50 milligrams to feel an effect, like, sorry, I don't think it is worth that risk to be then serving 50 to anybody who asks for it. So those are my thoughts on those two topics.
Thanks, Sam. I've got Nate, Pablo, Chris, and Rochelle.
Yeah, thank you. One of the first questions I wrote down was kind of, I think, where this is headed is, is this going to be something that we look at with existing licensees? So do we have these restaurants that we're going to try to fit this model? And if these municipalities opt in, does that mean that these restaurants can then add this component? Or are we looking at this from more of a new niche standalone cigar club type hospitality establishment? I'm thinking that in order for this to be successful, we probably should think about the latter instead of the former. I can see a lot of instances where restaurants are going to think about this like it is alcohol and try to treat it like it is alcohol, but it's just so vastly different than alcohol. The awareness around it is just really not there. So I do get concerned about the public safety aspect of it. And going into this, I talked to some of my board members who have been, longtime restaurant owners and in the hospitality industry for a long time. And their biggest concern is, we can look at and train our servers on how to handle, over serving somebody with alcohol or recognizing the symptoms of somebody that's already intoxicated once they get to a restaurant. How do we do this with cannabis, and how do we reduce our liability? Because if there's one bad story that results from cannabis over, being inappropriately served to somebody, I think that's going to really set back the efforts and the intention of what this task force is trying to do. So really going about this in a cautious way. I think I used cautiously optimistic in one of my opening prompts that we were given. Going about it in a very careful way is really going to serve the industry and the both the cannabis industry and the hospitality industry better than trying to fit this into a one size fits all restaurants, could opt into this type of thing.
Thank you, Nate. Pablo?
Yeah, to kind of be on topic with the dosing of the edibles, I think an opportunity is to streamline what methods and concentrates are going to be best practices to actually infuse the food. Because right now, typically you'll see an infusion that is fat soluble. So usually cannabinoids have to be fused with, you'll see like peanut butter, things like that. But there is newer technology that's called nanotechnology, so that it's a much smaller molecule that's able to be water soluble. And the onset of those cannabinoids are between 10 and 15 minutes as opposed to 60 and 90. So maybe that's an opportunity to streamline, okay, maybe just in these consumption lounges, we're just using nanotechnology. So it's a quicker onset instead of playing that guessing game of being like, when is this going to hit? When is this not? So I just think Yeah, that could be a great opportunity to streamline what concentrates we're really using or what we're regulating has to be used for these kind of places.
Is there,
Oh, sorry, I was just gonna say, I imagine for our culinary experts in the room, like, what you don't want is someone to have a beautiful meal at your restaurant and then feel the effects of it after they leave, right? You want that full experience. Everyone I've talked to who operates in this space wants that experience to be a paired experience and not a subsequent experience.
Yeah, because you're sending them off before it even kicks in, right? That's like the worst scenario, and nothing's happening under the roof.
I was just gonna say, is there a concern that by specifying the methods that we are limiting creativity within the industry? Because that is what we hear constantly when we're doing rulemaking.
But what Pablo's saying, it makes a lot of sense. I don't see a lot of people just like taking chocolate, a chocolate bar and breaking it down. I picture people buying concentrate in bulk, and then they're gonna, you have to, you can't directly work with that concentrate. You're gonna have to break down that concentrate and then have doses and a base thing that you take from. And then that's gonna be tracked, and everything can be tracked from there. You're not just gonna be like squirting things on the plates like people probably think you are.
And this could be a concentrate that they could buy, in, like, say, buy bulk flour from like a different wholesaler, and then it's onto them to change that into that nanotechnology. So it could kind of still be an opportunity to buy whatever you want from any supplier, but then it's on you to kind of change that to what the end result compound needs to be. So it doesn't like officially limit being like, oh, I can only buy nanotechnology from Rochelle, or I can only, you know what I mean? So it just depends. It could be, yeah.
And can I just add that we're constantly comparing this to alcohol, right? Because it's the other intoxicating label. But if you think about serving alcohol, you serve a standard drink, so it has a certain amount of alcohol in it. So it might be that this is a standard
dose.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking, like a 2.5, and like you said, you make one herb
Picture
butter.
pulling from
Then,
something.
yes, one big herb butter batch, just like you do now. You put that into metrics that it's a 6-pound batch, and then you've got your 5-gram butter tab that's gonna go out. It's been sent off to the lab. It's been tested. So every time you go to put it on something, it's a 2.5 milligram piece of butter that goes out.
This stops your employees from going in it without you knowing. You know how often that happens? This stops so much thing. Everything has to be watched. It's gonna have to be tracked. You're gonna have a bulk item that you work from. There's no, I can't picture a space where, oh, I need a chocolate bar for this, I need this for that, I need this for that. Because then you don't know what you're doing unless you have clear inventory. I just picture having a base product that you're working with and you're watching it go down. You know exactly what where. Oh, if it's like down and it's not tracked, then you can figure out what happened to that. So there's a lot more to it. It's just being food given out at this point.
Okay, I've got Chris, Rochelle, Lexi. and
Sorry.
Jimmy.
I'm gonna be wicked quick. I'm gonna change gears real quick. I just wanted to, under our concerns here, so we do have an adopted mechanical code in the state right now through the UBEC board. So right now we are under the 2015 International Mechanical Code that is in the process, in the early stages of the process of being moved to the 2021 Mechanical Code. So we just talked about like fitting in parameters. That's where we're at right now. That would need to be, I think, looked at for any type of ventilation system or anything like that. At least give us a baseline to start with.
All right, Rochelle.
So mine ties back to the dose set. This is all adult dose, and not, I'm kind of playing common sense here. Isn't it a 10 milligram serving is the max anyway? So if it falls in line with adult use rules, there's your 10 milligram. Can't be more than
anything up to
right. Yeah, exactly. So you've got your 2.5 for your salad dressing. You've got your 2.5 for your butter. Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
so you're building,
but you're still falling within that dosing.
And where we are at the restaurant, it's about an hour and a half standard for a party of two. Like whether
It's
you're
gonna
getting
kick in.
a full course or whatever it is. And maybe when you make the reservation, if it is a full service restaurant, we're not just talking a cafe, then you say, what is your driving plan? And like that has to be put into
Mhm.
your like open tables or whatever your system is, or even maybe it's something that has to do with metric. What's your driving plan? And it's something that the customer signs off on. We're staying at a hotel. My husband's not consuming, or my 21-year-old's picking me up or something.
I
do. Oh, sorry.
Speak out, sure.
Oh, sorry, yes.
I do like the nanotechnology idea. I mean, I understand what people are saying about restricting. I don't know if that restricts creativity though, because that technology is allowing you guys to create more freely, if you ask me, because then you're not bound to a binding agent. Am I wrong? I'm just checking to make sure that I'm like understanding correctly.
I personally don't think there's gonna be any creative problems for anybody.
Okay.
If you're a chef and you understand how food works, you're not gonna run into an issue. You can infuse anything you want.
Yeah.
And with almost most concentrates, but with Pablo's saying, that for running a business standpoint and having the guests enjoy the experience, it makes sense.
Because it's like pairing with a glass of wine. I want my wine with my food.
Yeah.
Yeah, for a reason. My other comment is actually in reference to the license talking about only offering up new licenses and not offering it to existing restaurants or businesses. I don't necessarily, and no disrespect meant, agree with that, because we are vacation land. A lot of these businesses that once September, October rolls around, they're with restaurants potentially closed on a Monday and a Tuesday that I frequent in the summer on Monday and Tuesday. What is prohibiting them from licensing themselves and opening up to serve on Monday or Tuesday with cannabis infused products for people to allow them to generate revenue that is going untapped at that point in time for people that live here? I mean, we're all consumers in your city, right? So not all of us, I'm sorry. There's a good chunk of us here. So I'm just, I guess, creative thinking, because we're always trying to find additional revenue here in the state for all of us. And that's a great way for restaurants to take that opportunity.
Michelle, it's always fun to disagree with each other. No worries about that. That's what we're here for. If we weren't disagreeing, I'd be concerned. All right, let's see, and then Heather.
So my first thing was going back to the serving sizes, and I think that was a great point. The 10 milligram is kind of in statute as the serving size, because what I was thinking is like, if you're getting this meal and that has 2.5, and this side has like, how does that start compounding? And keeping track of that, I think, is really important, just from like a serving perspective, similar to standard drink, like making sure that that's kind of in the forefront of thought with what people are ordering and how much they're starting to get. The other thing that came to mind was switching gears, municipalities opting in. Some municipalities already have like limits to the number of licensees, they set caps, and how does this play into that? Especially with this laundry list of like different types of, ideas. And so I think that's just something that we'll have to kind of think about, and like, is it a different cap for hospitality than it is for municipalities that are just opting in for retail or whatnot? So
Yeah.
Seems like they would have to make an amendment to their ordinances that they already put into place where they have those caps listed in order to even be able to allow it to happen.
right, but then do they set a new cap for how many hospitality? Because if it's, okay, we have 2 restaurants, but what about the outdoors? I
think we would look at that, sorry to interject, but we would look at that by like license type. Is it a brand new license type, or is it an add-on to what we already consider an adult street sale? I think plays into that.
All right, Heather?
Heather, did you still have your hand raised, or?
Yes, sorry, it just took me a minute to get myself unmuted. So a couple of comments. I agree wholeheartedly with the idea that we want current businesses that want to expand their opportunity to be able to stay in business in Maine to take advantage of the potential option to add cannabis hospitality to what they're offering. And I just wanted to go back to I think it was Anne that talked about smoking. I took a quick spin through the different states that you got the list of different states and what is offered. There's only one of those states that doesn't allow smoking or vaping. And I believe, and you can please correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that in Maine, we do have some cigar bars where people can purchase a cigar and then be in that environment and consume it. So I wouldn't want to restrict cannabis if there is a way for that to happen, that smoking and or vaping can happen for tobacco. As a representative of the campaign to legalize in Maine, we kind of were focused on the treat it like alcohol. And I guess in this case, in a lot of ways, I'd want to say treat it like alcohol / tobacco. So if it's, in my personal opinion, if it's okay for alcohol, it should be okay for cannabis.
Okay, thank you, Heather. All right, we're a little under 20 of. So
Can I just add one quick
yeah,
thing?
please, Rose.
Sorry.
You're fine.
Because actually two things, sorry. Just regarding, smoking or edible or liquid consumption. I mean, I love a weed beverage. I don't like edibles. I don't. It's not going to stop me from using cannabis if that's the only thing available. But actually, marijuana smoking is how I quit cigarette smoking, strangely enough, because I allowed myself to secondhand smoke outside in places where people were smoking. And that sort of weaned me off of nicotine. And then if I had a really sincere craving, I would take one hit off of the joint, which I gotta believe is better for me than smoking an entire cigarette or 3. I know it is because I feel better. So I would keep, I would just advocate for inhalation via smoke, however you want to inhale it. And then, in terms of the dosing, I mean, I get that. And I like the 10 milligram limit. A friend of mine in Jamaica ate a 250 milligram brownie.
Whoa. I will say if I ate 10, I wouldn't feel it. So you're gonna miss a lot of your demographic.
He slept a lot. But and then I think, in the airport on my way to Jamaica, I go and order a beer and they say, do you want a 10, 16 or 24 ounce? Do you, would you like a 6 ounce or a 9 ounce glass of wine? And so, I mean, in the same way, you could say, 2.5, 5 or 10 or, 2.5, 5, whatever, the same.
It's just like alcohol. You don't overserve alcohol, right? It's gonna be the same thing. There's gonna be a cap.
And I don't know, I guess what I will ask, what is the research on the relationship between cannabis smoke and like cancer? And we know clearly what the correlation between cigarette smoke and cancer is, right? There's a lot of research on that. But marijuana is more curative than it is damaging, I would say.
We can circulate some resources.
The cancer part comes in with edibles, because edibles slows down your blood, and then the cancer that's connected and intertwined with your blood doesn't get fed as much, and supposedly tumors can shrink. That's where the science is. Smoking isn't gonna help. Unless you have certain cancers for nausea, stuff like that. That's what it will help.
All right. Well, I'm going to transition quickly to opening up about sort of some.
Director Hudak, do you mind if I just jump in? I don't know if you saw my hand raised.
Sorry, I did not, Ann.
No, it's okay. Before we moved on, I just wanted to know a couple of things. The first is I think the stores that allow for smoking inside are grandfathered in. If you look at the statute, it looks like there's the stores that were licensed before 2007 are allowed to still have that. So I think that's probably, I'd have to look at the legislative history, something they want to let existing businesses continue. And I also think that, I don't think anyone knows definitively enough about cannabis use. I think that's probably the federal government's fault for not deschedulizing it, where we've been able to do enough studies on it. So I just want to make sure I note that when we're speaking about, effects and non-effects of cannabis use, either by smoking or ingestion.
All right, thank you, Anne. Quickly, Natasha.
I'm sorry.
You're good?
I keep having this other thought, which is not about restaurants at all. But is about going back to the idea for your hospitality and having tours, and what does that mean as far as potentially having even educational classes or something to that effect. So I think it was David that mentioned something about you have some customers that can come in that can be really quiet and shy. You might also, those same people might be new to the topic and might be not wanting to purchase any flower because they don't know how to roll a joint or even how to smoke it. So not necessarily talking about on-site consumption with it, but the idea of being able to host a tour ending with have your own pre-roll class at the end or something to that effect. So to me, that could still be part of the hospitality aspect because you're hosting them, you're teaching them, you are helping them enjoy the entire topic by introducing them and providing that education. Or someone else was talking about educating the consumer. So to me, that kind of goes hand in hand. But I don't think that there's a space right now where you can open up a package of flour and help someone roll a joint at the counter. So just like that.
There is a lot of education happening at dispensaries, I will say. But you're not gonna have that if you're selling at a restaurant, right? You're not gonna have that education for the consumer.
But even
So
at
it
a
is hard.
dispensary, I don't think you can
No.
like, here, let me show you how to roll this joint.
Is that kind of like the Tupperware party model?
Oh,
okay.
Or kind of like a baking class, right?
Yeah.
Where everyone learns to make croissants.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Class,
Yeah.
yeah,
Or
type of thing,
tasting.
like-
And then you all smoke your own joint at the end.
Yeah.
How to infuse it, how to this, how to
Make your own
that.
blend. I mean, I don't know.
Exactly, salad mix.
No, that's right.
All right, everyone.
No
So,
blast.
I will ask the question now. We don't need the answers to be exhaustive now, but for a little bit of a homework assignment too. By the end of the week, send to Lexi ideas of names, categories of expertise, et cetera, of subject matter experts who you'd like to hear from. We have a lot of expertise around this table and online, but we've touched on a ton of topics today. And having, as I said, someone come in for 5, 10, 15 minutes to talk to us about a certain topic and then for us to discuss, I think would be helpful to give you all a bit of a future run of show that might help in thinking about both who we might want to hear from and when we would want to hear from them. The second meeting of the task force is July 24th, where the topics will be what kind of license or licenses we should have for the cannabis hospitality establishments in Maine and how different methods of consumption are to be regulated. The third meeting on August 14th is what other products or services may be offered at cannabis hospitality establishments. We'll also discuss local control at that meeting. The fourth and final meeting, August 28th, will be training for cannabis hospitality establishment employees. And then we'll also circle back to any miscellaneous issues that didn't get picked up in today, meetings 2 and meetings 3. Also pass along to Lexi and happy to discuss here as well. If there's something we can do a little bit different in meetings 2, 3, and 4 that could enhance and strengthen the experience for all of us. But before I thank all of you for showing up, I just wanted to open the floor to that kind of input and ideas that we may have.
Do we have those 1, 2, 3, 4 topics? Were they emailed to us? Or did it just say meeting 1, 2, 3, 4?
Meeting 1, 2, 3, 4, but I
So
can put
we
those ready
get
for you.
that?
Yes.
Okay.
They essentially fit into those
Okay.
categories, but Lexi will circulate it.
We made sure to cover them all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, you've got some homework assignments to do. Let me make sure I'm not missing anything. Oh, and if there are other resource asks, we'll circulate some information about the
Indoor air quality.
Indoor air quality, but also the relationship between cannabis consumption and cancer. And any other resources that popped up today, as you're reflecting on today, if there are things you want us to circulate some links or some resources about, just send those to Lexi, and we will be on that. And then finally, I just want to say, this is an issue that's come before the legislature multiple times. This is an issue that I've taken a look at in other states, as I mentioned from the outset. This is a topic that can become very, very contentious very quickly. And I just want to thank all of you. This has been a wildly productive meeting. You guys have, each and every one of you absolutely exceeded my expectations for what I thought this meeting was going to be. The professionalism and respect is something I really also value, and a big pat on the back to all of you. I'm very much looking forward to the next 3 meetings and continuing these discussions. I think today was a good overview with a lot of detail packed into an overview, and a lot, I think, for all of us to digest. And looking forward to seeing you on the 24th.
Nice.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks, everyone.
All right, hands in.
Thank you.
I love it.